dear students. Today we are looking at paper number 314 E by C. As you know, it's an optional paper, and the paper is Commonwealth Literature. One of the texts that you have to do in this paper is Imtiaz Dharker. Imtiaz Dharker, the Pakistani-born British poet who now lives between London and Mumbai. In the syllabus, we have 3 of her poems prescribed. Let me begin by telling you something about Imtiaz Dharker. Born in Lahore in 1954, the family moved to London, moved to England, Glasgow, in fact, when she was just 1 year old. So we could almost say that in her upbringing, in her education, in her cultural, the traditions that she imbibed, in all that, she was very British. But she was a Muslim from Pakistan, and any one of those traditions, many of those traditions stayed with her, stayed with the family, stayed with the relatives she met, and stayed with her to a great extent. So very interestingly, she describes herself as belonging to 3 cultures. To quote her, she says, she is a Scottish Muslim Calvinist, adopted by India and married into Wales. My dear students, can you see the kind of cultural influences that have gone into the making of her as a poet? As I told you, she now lives between London and Mumbai. She has 5 books of poetry to her credit. She won the Queen's Gold Medal. And interestingly, all her books of poetry are self-illustrated. That is, she does her own illustrations. What is it that she writes about? Most of her poems, of course, as I told you, we'll be doing 3 poems. Postcard from God, 1, Living Space, and Adam's Daughter. But if you look at her poems in general, most of the poems have the theme of violence. But please remember, in spite of all the violence, both violence at home and outside in the world, there is always a ray of hope in all her poems. She questions, she interrogates many of the cultural traditions. She interrogates the ideas about home, about space, about women. One of her very, very interesting and popular poems, in fact 2 that she wrote, Parda 1 and Parda 2. She does not look at Parda anymore as just being a part of a woman's dress. Certain religions in the world, as we know, prescribe the Parda as being essential for a woman. It's not just a dress, it's much more than that. So let's go on, having looked at her generally, her themes. Let's look at some of her poems. The poems that are prescribed for us, right? As I mentioned to you. The first poem that I'm going to read out to you is called Postcard from God, 1. Yes, I do feel like a visitor, a tourist in this world that I once made. I rarely talk, except to ask the way, distrusting my interpreters, tired out by the babble of what they do not say. I walk around through battered streets, distinctly lost, looking for landmarks from another promised past. Here in this strange place in a disjointed time, I'm nothing but a space that sometimes has to fill images invade me. Picture postcards overlap my empty face, demanding to be stamped and sent. Dear, who am I speaking to? I think I may have misplaced the address. But still, I feel the need to write to you, not so much for your sake as for mine, to raise these barricades against my fear, postcards from God, proof that I was here. Yes, my dear students, now that you have heard the poem, let us look at the poem in detail. I've already told you that she was born in Lahore, that she moved to Glasgow, and that today she lives partially in India. So can you imagine the kind of wandering, the kind of rootlessness maybe that she has felt again and again? And therefore, in this poem, she talks about maybe moving from one place to another. And who is she writing to? Who is she interacting with? Yes, I do feel like a visitor, a tourist in this world that I once made. I'm trying to make a home somewhere. I'm thinking of this place as home, and then I move on. Remember the three cultures that I talked about. Is she able to interact with people around her? I rarely talk except to ask the way, distrusting my interpreters, tired out by the babble of what they do not say. Is she being accepted wherever she goes? Does she feel that she belongs? Does she see distrust in the eyes of people around her? Is she talking of a certain kind of xenophobia that she has to face? Is she talking about the distrust of the outsider? Is she talking about feeling alienated, being an alien in a foreign land? Yes, my dear students, she talks about all this and much more. I walk around through battered streets, distinctly lost, looking for landmarks from another promised past. When she goes back to a city where she has lived in, maybe she goes back to Pakistan, maybe she goes back to Glasgow, or when she comes back to Bombay, as she's traveling from one place to another, she's always looking for something that seems familiar. She's looking for a landmark. For a landmark, she says, from another promised past. When I came there last time, this is what it looked like. And what does it look like now? This is what makes her feel that she's a visitor, that she doesn't have a permanent home there, that she's maybe just a tourist. Here, she goes on, in this strange place, in a disjointed time, I'm nothing but a space that sometimes has to fill. I need to belong. I need to make this my own, she says, and images invade me. Picture postcards overlap my empty face, demanding to be stamped and sent. For many of you, my dear students, picture postcards may not be very common. But long ago, not so long ago, maybe even 20, 25 years ago, of course, before you were born, before technology had progressed so much that I can stand on Eiffel Tower and send a selfie to you. Before that, wherever we went, whatever place we visited, we always sent picture postcards. Of course, the picture postcards didn't have us in the background because remember, we bought those picture postcards. So everywhere she went, she probably bought a picture postcard, which had to be stamped and sent. But remember, now it's the time of the selfie. It's the time of technology. So what was once only a picture postcard today has you also in the picture. Because as I just mentioned, you are at a tourist spot. You take a selfie. So earlier it would have been only the Eiffel Tower, only the Statue of Liberty, only the Taj Mahal. But today what do you have? You have you also there in the picture. And you want to reach out. You want to send it. Demands to be stamped and sent, she says. Who am I speaking to? I think I may have misplaced the address, but still I feel the need to write to you, not so much for your sake as for mine. To reach out across continents, across distances, across miles and kilometers. Is she also talking about something spiritual? Is there within each one of us the need to relate, to reach out to God? Maybe there is. And therefore she says, I feel the need to write to you, not so much for your sake as for mine. To raise these barricades against my fear. Postcards from God, proof that I was here. So it could be a land you're visiting, or it could be this world itself. A deep poem written by a visitor, a traveler, going from one land to another. The second poem that I'm going to be talking to you about, the poem that is prescribed in your syllabus, is a poem called Living Space. Very different from the first poem that we did. And here is a poem that, my dear students, many of you could probably relate to. Let me first read the poem before I begin talking about it. The poem is called Living Space. There are just not enough straight lines. That is the problem. Nothing is flat or parallel. Beams balance crookedly on supports thrust off the vertical. Nails clutch at open seams. The whole structure leans dangerously towards the miraculous. Into this rough frame, someone has squeezed a living space and even dared to place these eggs in a wire basket. Fragile curves of white hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe, gathering the light unto themselves as if they were the bright, thin walls of faith. Look at the poem again, my dear students. It's a short poem. The poem is titled Living Space. And as her illustrations show, it's actually the poet looking at a slum in Mumbai. All of us living in different cities in India, in Ahmedabad, for example, and our visits to other cities of the world, we know that slums are an integral part of any big city. It's very easy for us to scoff and call them eyesores, but they are living spaces for hundreds of millions of people. I recently read an article about Dharavi, about the kind of enterprises, the kind of entrepreneurs, the kind of life that goes on in that one of the biggest slums in the world. Anyway, this is not just about Dharavi. This is about a slum in Mumbai, Bombay. It could be any slum. And have you seen these slums, my dear? How those houses seem to stand so close to each other. Are we looking at how many feet did they go into for the foundation? Are we talking of granite and cement and wood and iron and beams and pillars? No, my dear. The way she describes it, she says that there are just not enough straight lines. That is the problem. Do you have a roof there? Do you have somebody laying the roof? Nothing is flat or parallel. Beams balance crookedly on supports thrust off the vertical. Nails clutch at open seams. The whole structure leans dangerously. But yet it's towards the miraculous because it holds life. Seems like a pure description of just the physical reality of the house. But no, because in that house, in those houses, in those slums live human beings. It is their living space. And so the poem goes on, very touchingly. Into this rough frame, someone has squeezed a living space and even dared to place, what have they put there? These eggs in a wire basket. Fragile curves of white hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe. One of the things which break easily is the egg. So we have described the kind of houses that they live in, the slums. And then she says, but even there is hope. Somebody has placed eggs, something that is so fragile, something that is so human. Life too is that fragile, my dear. In those hung over the dark edge of a slanted universe. Because remember, there are no straight lines in those houses. Gathering the light into themselves as if they were the bright, thin walls of faith. What keeps us going, my dear students? In spite of all that poverty, in spite of the lack of engineering, or superb engineering to be building houses with no straight lines, she says, it is faith, the human faith. Remember, I already told you that in spite of all the violence that we see in her poems, there is always hope. The last poem that is prescribed for you is a poem called Adam's Daughter. Her eyes watchful, twisted bird-like at me, her mouth busy at the bread, teeth frantic at the crust as small animals worrying the dread. At 3 years old, she has seen enough to live in dread. Hands give and often take away. There is no pattern to it. The food is there and sometimes disappears. Her mother's hands are often kind and suddenly rough, knowing that the scrap she brings will never be enough. And women come with heavy shoes where feet should be, stirring up dust as crows do dangerously. The street worms in upon us, rubs against her spine. Her mouth works busily, but her mind is still waiting to see what my next move would be. Out of her eyes I see myself, crow-black, vast, blocking out the sun. You heard the poem, my dear students, and maybe some image comes in front of you. As we walk the streets, as we drive through the streets of any city maybe, we do see these helpless kids maybe begging at traffic lights. Here we have Adam's daughter. All that she's probably trying to say is from primeval times, this has been going on. Those who do not have, the have-nots, who have to rely, who are totally at the mercy of those who have. So can you imagine a scene of a woman probably handing out something to a poor child? She begins with a description of the child. Her eye is watchful, twisted bird-like at me, her mouth busy at the bread. So the child is looking at this woman, probably the Good Samaritan who has come to give her something. And what is she doing? She's looking at that woman. That innocent child is probably trying to gauge what are the intentions of this woman. So what is she doing? Her eye is watchful, twisted bird-like at me. Remember, birds' eyes, they're not like ours. They don't have eyelashes, right? Her mouth busy at the bread. So she's munching at something. Teeth frantic at the crust. Nobody is going to give her nice, soft, fresh bread. The bread is probably stale. The bread is probably dry. And here you have this poor kid trying to bite at the edges. Teeth frantic at the crust, as small animals worrying the dread. She's not sure whether this bread is going to be with her or somebody is going to snatch it away from her. Even at 3, she knows the fear. She knows the fear of hunger. She probably knows the fear of deprivation. At 3 years old, she has seen enough to live in dread. Hands give and often take away. The same hands, human hands, give sometimes, but sometimes it is the same cruel human hands that also snatch it away. There is no pattern to it. There is food there. The food is there, and sometimes it disappears. It could be an older child. It could be a stray dog. It could be an eagle swooping up. You're never sure whether what is there in your hand is probably going to reach your mouth or not. She already knows all this at the age of 3. She has seen enough to live in dread, and the food sometimes disappears. Her mother's hands are often kind and suddenly rough, knowing that the scraps she brings will never be enough. After all, a mother with maternal love and care. But in that poverty and hunger and deprivation, can the mother always be sweet and loving? Sometimes she probably snatches away what the little child has in her hand. So sometimes the mother's hands, the hand here is a metaphor, is a synecdoche, metonymy. You remember those figures of speech. It's talking about the mother as a whole. Hands just being representative of the persona of the mother. She knows that she will not always have enough. And women come with heavy shoes where feet should be, stirring up dust as crows do dangerously. The poor child is probably sitting at a street corner, maybe on a pavement, on a footpath, maybe under a lamppost, maybe on a broken bench, maybe on some stones, ragged stones. And people walk by. And those people are probably wearing heavy shoes. So you can hear the thump, thump, thump. And as they walk along, what do? They stir up dust dangerously. So here we are on a street. We have the woman who's giving and the child who's taking. But it looks as if the road itself, the street itself, the city itself, the hustle and bustle, people, the populous city rubs against her spine. And she puts it beautifully. The street worms in upon us, rubs against her spine. Her mouth works busily, but her mind is still. Why? She's waiting to see what my next move would be. Am I going to walk away? Am I going to give her something? Or am I going to even take away what has been given? And therefore, waiting to see what my next move would be. Out of her eyes, I see myself. Can you imagine? It's not the woman who is so far been looking at the child. Now the woman moves into being the child, and she's trying to see this woman. She's trying to see herself through the child. Out of her eyes, I see myself, crow black. Maybe she's in a burqa. Crow black, vast, blocking out the sun. Keats had once said, talking about negative capability, you really should be able to peck on the gravel with the sparrow in order to be able to understand what the sparrow feels. So also here, the woman moves into the persona of the child. Out of her eyes, I see myself, crow black, vast, blocking out the sun. That, my dear students, is just a sample of the kind of poetry that Imtiaz Dharker wrote. I don't have time to talk to you about the questions, but please go onto our website and look at our sample papers, look at the questions, and prepare for your exams even as you enjoy these poems. Stay home, stay safe, stay blessed. This too shall pass.